Lex Luthor is a changed man, but is all that about to change? Well, DC delves into the memories of Superman's greatest foe when the quest to contact Elseworld requires the genius of Old Lex. Let's talk about it right here in our review of Superman Lex Luthor Special number 1 from DC Comics. See you in 3. Welcome back to Comical Opinions. This is our review of Superman Lex Luthor Special number 1. Before we dig into the issue, let's recap kind of the context of where this story is situated. Lex Luthor is not himself. For all intents, Lex is a kind, introspective, thoughtful man who hopes to live a peaceful life, very much different from what you're used to. However, the Lex Luthor of today is a very different version of the nefarious mastermind and criminal who made his life's mission the utter destruction of Superman. To find out how Lex Luthor lost his memory and what he may have been working on before his memory loss, check out the DC All-In Special number 1 for background information. There's a link in the review down below. And also the House of Brainiac mini-event for the reason behind Lex's memory loss. Alright, with some of the context and background out of the way, let's dig into the issue. Superman Lex Luthor Special number 1 begins with Mr. Terrific contacting Superman for an in-person conversation regarding a sensitive matter. He doesn't want to divulge the information over their comm links. Since the death of Darkseid created Elseworld, Mr. Terrific and the Totality uncovered a hidden piece of reality that they can't quite connect with. The science to connect with that hidden reality involves delving into what we'll call the darker aspects of science that Mr. Terrific is afraid to visit. And the only man on Earth who knows how to reach those dark places without losing his sanity or doing something incredibly terrible is the old Lex Luthor. Elsewhere, the man we'll call New Lex and Mercy Graves enjoy an ice cream and a lovely afternoon walk in Centennial Park. Lex explains that he's only experienced brief flashes of memory since he's been attempting to try and restore his mind. His daughter Lena even went so far as to get Lex a piano in the hope that playing the music he learned as a child would somehow return what Lex lost. The attempt fails miserably because his abilities on the piano are terrible, but he's pretty much given up on all attempts at returning his memory anyway, so now he's just content with enjoying life as a reformed man. As the plot in the issue progresses in the present, interspersed between the scenes are brief flashes to Lex's musical development as a child. His moments of early brilliance were enjoyed by his mother, Letitia, but they were met with pain from Lex's jealous and abusive father, Lionel. In other words, Lex had a very unhappy childhood, even though he was praised by his mother. They don't show it outright, but he was effectively abused by his father. As Lex and Mercy continue their walk in Centennial Park, a crowd gathers around Lex when people recognize who he is. The crowd quickly becomes hostile, taking on mob-like qualities, but the risk of lynching is diffused when Superman suddenly flies down and disperses the scene. Big Blue asks if Lex has made any progress in restoring his memory, trying to be sort of generic about it, but at the same time pressing a little bit. In return, Lex explains his failure and also wonders aloud to Superman if the world is maybe just better off without old Lex returning, considering all the pain and damage he's caused. Superman realizes pressing Lex into return to his old self may be an unfair ask, so he just flies away. The issue ends when young Lex tries to earn his father's love by making him a musically based invention. The gift is not received well at all, but the tune Lex's invention plays reaches some grateful ears in the form of a very young child infant called Clark Kent. The memory of that tune now sets things right, or, depending on your point of view, may make things much, much worse. Hey, do you want to be part of our growing community and get exclusive perks? Become a channel member today. By becoming a member, you'll support a channel you love, which is ours because everybody loves it, but you'll also gain access to special badges, emojis, and members-only content. Click the join button below to become part of our family and help us create more of the content you enjoy. Now let's get back to the review. And that's the issue, so let's talk about impressions, art, positives, negatives, what have you. Superman Lex Luthor Special number 1 is a somewhat wholesome, thoughtful character piece about a damaged man given a second chance at life and the almost lose-lose choice he's given. If the goal was to add depth and dimension to Superman's greatest arch nemesis, Williamson accomplishes that mission pretty much on the nose. That said, there is a pretty distinct flaw in this issue, which we'll get to in a minute. Alright, moving on to the art, we have Eddie Barrows and Eber Ferreira, who would do a commendable job bringing Lex to life in an issue that leans on emotion, thinking, sort of personal interactions and reactions, and it's all driven by the facial acting. There's almost no superhero, big explosive action in this issue at all. So the visual impact comes through the strength of the artists and their ability to project dramatic moments. On the whole, it does a pretty good job of it. So you really get the sense that Lex is pained and struggling with what he went through in the past and in the present, and it really comes off pretty well. Now let's switch over to the big positives and negatives, starting with what's great about Superman Lex Luthor Special number 1. If the title didn't tip you off, this issue is squarely focused on building or rebuilding, depending on your point of view, Lex's personality and backstory to present him as a man haunted by his past. Writer Joshua Williamson successfully paints a sympathetic picture of Lex within the context of the ongoing emergencies happening within the All-In and Absolute initiatives. There's a little bit of a tether to both of those things, and it, for the most part, makes its connections pretty clear. However, we do want to provide some clarifying context. Just because Lex went through some traumatic experiences as a child, this does not mean that the Lex Luthor that's being presented here is somehow a misunderstood good guy. You know, there's a lot of push lately to make villains just misunderstood people trying to do the right thing, but maybe they're responding to past traumas or what have you. That's not what's happening here. However, this issue does make you appreciate that the traditional version of Lex Luthor is a more complex and even complicated kind of guy. He's not a misunderstood villain, he's still a villain, but there's some nuance and some depth behind his villainy. So let's talk about what's not great about Superman Lex Luthor Special number 1. The lacking element in this issue is really one solitary word: why. The journey from A to B plays out pretty well. You get to understand what Lex is going through, why he's being asked, at least at a general level, why he's being asked to get his memories back. But there's a distinct lack of motivation and urgency which Lex would need to make his final decision meaningful and impactful and really worth the effort and the potential damage it could do if he gets his memory back. And when I say why, it's really understanding why would he make that decision, because it has to be at least on par or greater than the risks that's being described. But we don't really get that risk. For example, why is Mr. Terrific trying to contact a hidden slice of reality? I mean, it might be a cool, interesting thing to do from a scientific perspective, but there's really no impetus behind it. Why does Mr. Terrific believe the quest is important enough to urge Lex Luthor to get back to his old villainous self? I mean, there's got to be some motivation behind that, right? Why would Superman risk unleashing the world's greatest supervillain without a better explanation from Mr. Terrific beyond, I would have to think dangerous thoughts to solve this problem? Okay, fine, but why would you make Lex Luthor do that? Why would you risk returning Lex Luthor to form? What was so important that Mr. Terrific felt he needed to have this done? And that really doesn't get a good explanation here. If we would look at it from a bigger or broader context with All-In and Absolute, if this story is so closely tied to the events of last year, why is nobody spending any time looking for Booster Gold? Is this related to the search for Booster? If not, why is nobody looking for him? If it is, why doesn't Mr. Terrific just say that, hey, we're looking for Booster Gold and we need this to help rescue that guy? Now, I do have it on authority from an inside source at DC that the mystery surrounding Booster Gold's disappearance is going to get resolved here in the next few months, but over the course of the last couple of months, especially with the Justice League, everybody's acting like they don't know who Booster Gold is or what happened to him when he went over to Elseworld when it was just supposed to be a 10-minute trip. It's all sort of vague and innocuous and nebulous and weird. But yeah, it does kind of turn into a weird sort of mystery that just got dropped. So the egg, or the kind of the core of what's going on with this issue, is perfectly fine. But the issue can only exist if you tie it to bigger, broader things that are happening within the context of the greater DC universe. So Williamson executes a perfectly good character piece, but those ties and those connections and those tethers that make this story go are just sloppy at best, and in some cases they don't even seem to make sense. Final thoughts when we think about Superman Lex Luthor Special number 1. It's a reasonably well done character study that explains the past that made old Lex Luthor a villain and gives new Lex a no-win choice for his future. Joshua Williamson's script does a commendable job of adding depth and complexity to the Lex Luthor character that's so familiar to so many people, and the art team's presentation looks great. That said, the big choice Lex is given lacks a clear rationale and a sense of purpose, urgency, and motivation to back it. So it kind of feels like he's making a really big, important, critical, potentially dangerous choice without a good reason for doing so. Therefore, Superman Lex Luthor Special number 1 earns a 6.8 out of 10. Overall, again, it's a nice character study, and it really does a lot to kind of give you a clear sense of and a clear picture of who Lex Luthor is. But if you're trying to connect it into these bigger, more meaningful things that are happening around the DC universe, you have to create some better connections than what's presented here. But what do you think? Were you looking forward to getting to know Lex Luthor on a more deeper and personal level? Leave a thumbs up if you found this review helpful, and drop a comment below with where you think Lex Luthor should go next, now that there's probably the aspect that he has returned to becoming the villain that we all know and hate. Also, remember to click on the link in the description to read the written review, check out the variant covers and preview pages, and buy this comic to help support the channel. Your support, of course, is greatly appreciated. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please click on the subscribe button below. We'd really appreciate it. So thank you very much for joining, and stay tuned through the outro for more reviews just like this one.